What is the worst animal testing experiment you've ever heard of and uncovered? There's some really bad ones out there. What is the absolute worst one you've ever heard of and uncovered?
The kitten cannibalism was pretty horrendous. Breeding kittens just to force them to eat cat meat and then killing them even though they were perfectly healthy after they collected their feces out of a litter box. I mean, that's literally what was happening. They were doing that to thousands and thousands of kittens. The DOJ, until recently, was stabbing, shooting, and blowing up live animals for training exercises. We were able to cut that and defund that. The experiments that the NIH funded and Fauci funded in Tunisia, where they were putting the dogs and heads in mesh cages and filling them with biting flies. Yeah, there's a lot of nightmarish stuff that we're being forced to fund, and taxpayers don't like it, and they don't even know how bad the situation is. If they did, they would be, marching in the streets.
Nancy Mace is on a real tear recently, right? Now, normally she's always talking about women's issues like keeping boys out of girls' sports or keeping transgenders out of women's spaces. But today she's going to talk about the horrors being done on animals because of government-funded research by people like Dr. Anthony Fauci, okay? So before we get to these clips, don't forget to like and comment on this video so we can break through the algorithms. Here we go.
Recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. Good afternoon. Late last year, the White Coat Waste Project exposed more than $10 million in taxpayer funds that were spent creating transgender mice, rats, and monkeys. These DEI grants funded painful and deadly transgender experiments that forced lab animals to undergo invasive surgeries and hormone therapies at universities across the country. For example, the Biden-Harris administration spent $2.5 million taxpayer dollars, $2.5 million taxpayer dollars to study the fertility of transgender mice. Let that sink in. We spent over $2 million studying the fertility of transgender mice. $1.1 million was spent to find out if female rats receiving testosterone therapies to mimic transgender men were more likely to overdose on a party drug, commonly used in the LGBTQ community to induce drug-fueled what's called, quote, chemsex. I asked my staff what was chemsex and the chemical, and I guess it's something called GHB, which is a date rape drug, and also a drug that's used recreationally. So we spent over $1 million to find out if female rats receiving testosterone therapy were more likely to overdose on a date rape drug. Like, that's what your taxpayer dollars were being spent on. Federal funds were also used to forcibly transition male monkeys to see if hormone therapy made them more susceptible to HIV. Now, I didn't know this until recently, but monkeys cannot be infected with HIV. Yet this federally funded experiment forced them to take hormone-altering drugs to study a virus they cannot have. The Biden-Harris administration was so eager to propagate their radical gender ideology across all facets of American society that they were surgically mutating animal genitals. Like, taxpayer money went to that. So my question is, were they castrating mice, castrating monkeys? Were they getting double mastectomies? The language that they used in many of these experiments were, quote, gender-affirming care, which I learned about 3 years ago what that meant. I thought that was maybe just some hormones or something something like that, but apparently gender-affirming care is actually surgical mutilation of genitals, and apparently it's not just humans, they're doing it too. We were doing it with taxpayer dollars to animals. It's well known that because of the differences between animal and human biology, animal testing frequently does not produce results relevant for humans. In fact, 90% of novel drugs that are successful in animal tests fail in human clinical trials. Today's scientific questions are so complex that we have well surpassed a time where it is useful or appropriate to rely on inhumane animal experiments to answer them. Recently developed technological tools can more accurately model human biology and identify solutions that are more useful for human patients. But it is often the federal bureaucracy that prevents these new technologies from being used. Instead of adequately investing in these innovative alternatives, the federal government has continued to funnel taxpayer dollars towards cruel animal experiments. Today, most of the 27 NIH institutes and centers conduct or support animal testing, as does the Food and Drug Administration, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Department of Defense, and countless other agencies. We have some beagle puppies here with us today. Beagle puppies have gone through some of the worst medical experiments. I mean, drugging them with cocaine, having insects eat at them and their bodies so much until they die, drugging them until they die. These are God's creatures, and they're beautiful, and you can see them sitting in the front row today. So we thank the folks who are here and brought these beautiful beagle puppies here today. In fact, the U.S. government spends in excess of $20 billion a year conducting experiments on animals. The White Coat Waste Project found in 2021 that the NIH, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, a component of NIH at the time, ran by Dr. Fauci, spent $1.68 million force-feeding toxic drugs to beagle puppies between 6 and 8 months old before dissecting and killing them. The conversation we're having today is important. In 2022, due to public criticism lobbied against Fauci's NIAID by me and other members of Congress, another $1.8 million experiment to abuse beagle puppies in various drug tests was canceled. So I want to thank the work of White Coat Waste and everyone in the room today, others who've been on the forefront of this fight to end this sick and cruel and barbaric testing of animals today.
So this is simply just more fallout in the wasteful government spending we're seeing in Washington, D.C., right? When the money isn't going to something useful, to something purposeful, it's going to go towards anything and everything else, including here, mutilating animals just to discover transgender side effects, okay? This is completely insane to do that to another living being. Now, me, myself, I'm not a member of PETA or anything, and I do think that animal experimentation is useful when we're talking about, say, trying to cure cancer, etc. But these are wasteful, stupid experiments that we already know the outcomes of, right? As Dr. Fauci famously put beagles into cages and had flies eat their heads until they died, okay? We all know what would happen in that scenario. What did you learn? What was the medical issue that you had to understand from that particular horrible experiment, okay? When you watch a sci-fi or a horror movie, right? And you always have the big reveal of the evil doctor or the evil scientist, and he's doing all types of horrible experiments on humans and on animals or on hybrids of the two, right? That's how they show how awful he is, by the horrible things he's actually doing. And Nancy Mace just described all of that in graphic detail, all right? But this is what happens when you have no oversight. The money is going to anywhere, going to anyone for anything, and no one seems to care. And if it was actually earmarked for certain purposes, garbage like this would never get approved because the people wouldn't stand for it. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and stay safe out there, people, because they're coming after you.